Hey, welcome back, everybody. Very exciting and interesting episode in store for you. We're going to hit a taboo subject. I don't think it should be taboo, and I think my guest here would agree. It is something we have to talk about. It is something we can't be afraid of. It is transgenderism. Whether you're a conservative Republican like me or a liberal Democrat, we have to be talking about the truth and how we all live together. And I think that's the most important thing. I think that's the biggest goal that we should have. How do we all live together? How do we all respect each other? How do we live without infringing on each other's rights? And, I just want to go out and say, like, right from the beginning, as a conservative Christian Republican, when I see a transgender person, here's what I see. A person. And I think you have to start with that basic fact. We are all people trying to live together, and governance is about creating the structure that allows us to do so without infringing on each other's rights. Scott, thank you so much for being on the show and helping me talk about this.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me, Dan.
So, Scott, you're a transgender man. You transitioned at age 48, right?
42.
42, sorry.
I'm 48 now.
You're 48 now.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you'll look 42. Hey, thanks for coming on. You've been very outspoken about transitioning from woman to man, what that really means biologically speaking, what it doesn't mean, and especially you've been outspoken about the medical issues associated with that. I want to get into that. I want to get into your personal story, the complications, the ethical considerations, the politics of all this, the transgender movement. How do we navigate that? I want to talk military service for a little bit because that's close to home for me. And one of your big passions, which is protecting children, and how America's actually behind on this. And it sounds like our left-wing Europeans across the Atlantic are making it further than we are. So, but let's talk about you first and your experience. I mean, I've read through your interviews and your op-eds, and it's really impressive. Just your ability to speak out. You don't hold back, and I appreciate that. So I think this will be a great conversation. But take it away. How did this begin for you?
Well, I don't hold back because you can't hold back on this subject. When you hold back on the subject, what you're doing is you're making the subject political, and the subject is not political. It's not. The reason why we're in this mess right now is because people think it's about LGBT rights. They think it's about human rights. And we've gotten to a point where, 30 years ago, the right-wing Christians were, kind of downing the LGBT. And then they have, all this power now. And it's gone too far the other side. And so when society hears about transgenderism, the first thing that they see is LGBT, and nobody wants to take that on. Everybody wants to be loving and inclusive. And because of that, we're in a place in the world where we are mutilating our children. We don't know what happens to a body when you start to medically transition as children. We're not talking about the complications. And so because of that, people are stepping back. We need to forget that this is not about politics. This is about the medical industry using our children, our awkward children, our children that don't fit in, our LGBT children. They're using them, convincing them that they're trans, and nobody is born trans. You make trans with synthetic hormones and surgery. What these kids have is what is called a mental illness. It's gender dysphoria. You have gender dysphoria. You make transgenderism. So first of all, the first thing is that, yes, it is political, and it doesn't need to be. It's not a political issue.
It needs to be the scientific issue. So, I mean, walk me through your journey. At a young age, you came out as a lesbian, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
And then you had a really successful career, and then so how did, by age 42, how did you decide to undertake this surgery?
And I always say this. I always quote Barbara Kay, who's a writer in Canada, who's a good friend of mine. and I'm writing a memoir, and I sent her the chapter on this is why I transitioned, and she wrote me back and basically said bullshit. There has to be more to this. And then I thought, I got really offended. I'm like, no, this is it. And she goes, no, it's not. And so I sat on it for a while, and I realized that my personality is kind of an in-your-face personality. I mean, in kindergarten, the kindergarten teacher was reading a book. I, put my hand up and said, your reflections are wrong. And I grabbed the book and started reading. So from that perspective, I always had kind of a very strong presence. And it was never something that was accepted. As I got older, I was never a butch lesbian. I, worked in business. I put myself together. It was something you probably figured out in a short time talking to me. But I was growing to the point where I was okay with who I was. I was different. And that was okay. It did good for me in my career. But I fell in love with a Catholic woman, very, very religious Catholic woman, who almost to the point where I thought of it kind of a mental illness, so religious. And she couldn't accept the fact that she was a lesbian. And so for me in that relationship, she always used to say, you do things like a man with this. You have a very masculine aura. You have this, you have that. And it started to get me thinking that, hey, maybe there's something wrong with me, kind of a thing. Maybe she's right. And we separated, and she went through conversion therapy. Her family went through conversions. Of course, it doesn't work. And she came back to me, and it was right when everything was coming out with transgenderism, with the athlete, I forget his name. Anyways, and
Bruce Jenner,
I Am Jazz,
Caitlyn Jenner.
Yeah, and I thought, you know what? Maybe there is something wrong with me. And then it started to get into the point where my wife was worried that, she wouldn't be able to be around her grandkids. I mean, she would lose her family and this and that. So it was all a combination of this. And then what happened is I went to therapy, and there's two very significant things that happened to me. I went to therapy. I talked to the therapist about this, and she looked at me and said, how long have you been wearing men's clothes? Well, if you've seen me before the transition, I mean, I had very, female pants on. I had high heels on. I had earrings on. My makeup was towards the end of the day, but I by no means looked like a man. And it was like at that moment, I was like, am I the king that's not wearing any clothes, and everybody knew something about me that I didn't know about? And I looked down and I looked up and I went, I guess all my life then. all my life. And then when I went to a doctor, and the doctor said something to me, of course he was going to make money off me, but he said, have you ever been tested for intersex? And I was like, no, why? Well, you have kind of this jawline, and here I am, even at 42, I'm falling into this naivety, right? And the medical industry told me something was wrong with me, and I believe them. And that's what's happening with kids. So that's why I transitioned.
So there's this affirmative medical industry that's this affirmation process where if you have an issue, it must be this, and this must be the only outcome, which is I think the crux of the problem I want to talk about. Actually, I want to pause real quick because I'm hearing this like background noise. Can you hear it on your end, or is that just in my headphones? You can too. Okay, we're back. Yeah, so the issue you just pointed out was the medical industry tells you to affirm this, right? And is this everybody in the medical industry? How did this even start? I mean, it's hard to imagine. I deal with doctors often. I've got lots of health issues, like I'm missing an eye. I mean, they're always so skeptical. They're always so, why don't you take some Advil first before we prescribe you this? Why don't you go exercise first before we just go doing this? I don't care that you want all these things. Look, I wanted a new lens put in my left eye. Doctors were like, no, we're just not going to do it at a certain point. Now, it's a long story. So I don't understand why for this specific issue, the the common refrain and the activism and the medical community is in the process of affirmation. I mean, what happened there?
Well, I mean, let's take a look at the opioid crisis, right? Pharmaceuticals, this is not addictive. Take this, prescribe this to people. So what was the reason for it? It was a monetary reason. So walk with me on this a little bit. In the UK, they did a study on children in 2008. How many children were on hormone blockers? Now we have to look at the history of hormone blockers. Hormone blockers were developed by a company named Lupron that was deemed a criminal enterprise by the U.S. government in 2001. They were fined $874 million for bribery and false advertising. So that's the company that's telling us that hormone blockers aren't, they're reversible, they're this, they're that. But it's not FDA approved to work on gender dysphoric kids. We do not have any long-term studies, although we're starting to see kids that are now 19 and 20 with the size of 12-year-old hearts that are having a hard time, exercising. But they have the money to do the studies. They don't want to, because as soon as those studies start, all of this would stop. But so what's happening is in the UK, we had a small portion of kids that were on hormone blockers in 2008. If we fast forward to 2010, it increased by 4,000%. So 2008, 2010, a 4,000% increase in kids that were on hormone blockers. So why is that? Well, in 2008, what people don't realize is that when somebody is prescribed a hormone blocker that is a child, it yields 8 times more gross profit for that company. So you can write a prescription to a child for Lupron, you can write a prescription to an adult. The child is going to be a result of 8 times more monetary compensation for the pharmaceutical company. So in 2008, if we take the average amount that cost for kids to be on Lupron, that generated $800,000 a year in 2008. If we fast forward to 2018, we take those same numbers, it went from 800,000 to 36 million. And that's in a small part of Europe, in the UK, that fits in the size of Texas 15 times. So if we take that same model, okay, 800,000, 36 million, in the size of Texas 8 times, and we just take North America, if we change nothing, if everything stays the same with how many kids are claiming to be transgender, 22% of the entire population will be transgender. We're talking about $1 trillion industry that is protected by the LGBT. It's protected by a society that has no clue what's going on, is protected by all these people that think that it's about politics. And the only people that are talking up are evangelical Christians, which are fine, but unfortunately, whether it be right or wrong, they've lost their influence. When as soon as the LGBT comes up and it's an evangelical, doesn't matter if they're right 100 million percent, nobody's going to listen. It goes backwards.
Yeah, no, and that's absolutely right. I mean, I tell my fellow conservatives all the time, you as right as you are, you can't make arguments based on the authority of the Bible, because especially young people, they just don't see that as an authority. They're questioning it, which is normal when you're young, I guess. But you're absolutely right. It's got to be a big tent conversation. And so you're indicating that it's partly financial. There's financial incentives, of course. It's got to be more than just that, though. It almost seems like this sort of, like a different kind of religion, obviously, but a sort of a religious adherence to this idea of immediate affirmation. Because that doctor certainly makes money by putting you on hormone blockers, but they're making money anyway. So it's a little hard for me to believe that it's purely financially driven. It just seems ideological as well.
It's not purely financial. Financial has a huge part to play. Keep in mind, though, I had a phalloplasty that billed my insurance $257,000 for one surgery.
What is a phalloplasty?
It's a huge, huge thing.
What is a phalloplasty? Wait, I think I know what that is.
Yeah. So financial has some to do with it. Some has to do with a lot of people wanting to do the right thing. I think there's a combination of what's happening in our society, which people that are my age and that have kids, we were raised in the time when the LGBT was trying to get rights, when all those stories about
Right.
conversion therapy, all that stuff. So we were the kids at 13, 14 years old that said, we're not going to do that to our kids. If our kids are gay, we're going to love them. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. So those are the parents, right? So the parents say, I've got a transgender kid. And it kind of goes back, well, I'm not going to do what, I saw everybody do to gay people. So I'm going to go to the medical field. The medical field is, getting all the propaganda about how this helps mental illness. And every single study, are you there? Sorry, I got a phone call.
Oh, yep. We're good. Keep going.
Okay. So then the mental health industry came out with 2 studies that said that, hey, you know what, medically transitioning your kids, it helps mental illness. It helps this. And so parents are like, God, it helps. Well, I'm going to do this. Well, what the news doesn't, cover is the fact that those studies have been retracted. Every single study that said that mental illness is helped by medical transition has been revoked. But we're not telling society that, right?
Right.
In Spain, I just gave a presentation. It's banned in the country.
They banned. Did you have a hearing? Were you testifying in front of
Yeah.
the government there, and then they banned it?
Yeah. For the Green Party. Yeah, they banned it. They don't want to hear from me because I tell the truth. And the truth is this, is medical transition is cosmetic surgery. Cosmetic surgery is not covered by governments. It's not covered by insurance because it's aesthetics, right? There are some people that feel more comfortable presenting as the opposite sex. It does not change your sex. I will always be biological male, but there are some people who find comfort in that. Not very many.
Biological.
Out of, let's say, 20 transgender people, and I know a lot of them, 18 of them regret with great regret. 1% is kind of like me. It's kind of like 50-50. And then you have one person like, Buck Angel, who it saved his life. Well, it needs to be available for that one person that saves its life. But who are all the other 19 people?
Yeah.
And if us adults are doing this and we have a detrans rate like this and nobody wants to cover it, it needs to be told. It absolutely needs to be told. These kids are on Reddit. They're on Tumblr. I've been kicked off of Reddit for just saying, medical transitioning doesn't really help mental illness. I'm banned for life.
So they're not hearing another side to it at all, even from people who have been through
hearing. And I'm getting banned in Spain. I can't get on mainstream news. It took me 2 years, thousands of emails, phone calls to finally get an article in Newsweek. You cannot listen to me for 15 minutes and come away and go, yeah, medically transition. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
You just can't.
Yeah. What could go wrong? Well, I want to get more back into your personal story. So what's the first surgery? I mean, how do people go through this? And then, at a certain point, I want to list, there's a long list of complications that you've had, and they're like, it's difficult to even fathom, how much you went through because of these surgeries. And then I want to ask you, or if you could just go ahead and answer, I mean, how prevalent is your experience? Is that unique? Is that an outlier? Or do a lot of other trans people experience the same kind of medical problems that you did?
A lot of trans have the problems that I have. Here's a problem with surgery. We can get into surgery, but here's a problem with surgery. The surgeon that did my phalloplasty that caused all the complications, we can talk about it, had 9 medical malpractice cases in the state of California. The attorney told me that he was banned from conducting surgery in San Francisco. Came to Texas, which has a tort reform act, right? Which means, the big conglomerates, you can't do those cases. It's an experimental procedure. As much as people don't want to hear it, trans medicine is experimental. So it kind of covers these surgeons. The LGBT covers these surgeons. Society covers these surgeons. And we're talking about complications like colostomy bags for life, losing all genitals, PTSD, leech therapy. I mean, horrible, horrible stuff. And he's fine. He's in California, goes to Texas, starts doing it over here. I have 8 attorneys that basically tell me, I'm sorry, trans medicine is experimental. What happened to you sucked, but there's nothing that we can do. For us to do a case, We have to create a baseline for care, and that's millions of dollars. And your case is just not good enough. We can't do a big case because of Texas Tort Reform Act. So we have surgeons that are at the bottom of the bottom. We're talking the sifting surgeons that make $200,000 a year taking out appendixes. All of a sudden, they can put trans on their door. They have people lining around. They don't have to be held accountable. They have insurance companies cutting them a check for $257,000. They've got the LGBT picketing them, and the only people that are covered or have the balls to say anything in the media, which I love, by the way, are the evangelicals, and they're right. You know, for the first time with LGBT stuff, no offense, but now nobody listens to them.
Yeah.
So.
And you've had, I mean, here's the list too. I mean, you know, people should understand, and I read some quotes from some of your other interviews, you know, 7 surgeries, pulmonary embolism, induced stress heart attack, sepsis, 17th month recurring infection, 16 rounds of antibiotics, 3 weeks of daily IV antibiotics, complete hair loss, loss of arm function, arm reconstructive surgery, permanent lung and heart damage, bladder damage, insomnia, hallucinations, hair growth on the inside of your urethra, PTSD, $1 million in medical expenses, you lost your home, your car, your job, your career, marriage. Temporarily, you were unable to look after your kids. And, you know, you still can't even sue some of these people. I mean, how are things now? When did that nightmare start to end? I mean, how many years were you going through this? Or has it ended?
I'm just coming out of it, actually. There was so much. I had PTSD. I didn't leave my house for a year during some things. I'm just now starting to get up and get going. I had kind of an awakening not long ago, a little bit over a year ago, and I was in so much pain constantly. I mean, I couldn't sleep. I had hallucinations. I mean, it was horrible, and it was horrible because I was bouncing from ER to ER. And I didn't want to go back to the surgeon, Dr. Crane, who hurt me. I mean, he's the one that I went into, and I had a ligament sticking through my arm. And he goes, yeah, that's great. And 4 days later, I was having reconstruction surgery. I mean, I had sepsis. I was developing sepsis. And he goes, no, you're great. 3 days later, I was in an ambulance for sepsis. I mean, I didn't want to go back to him. Yeah. And I lost all my insurance. I couldn't think. I couldn't problem solve. All the doctors in the ER would either laugh, or they would just say, sincerely, we have no clue what to do. Transgender medicine is experimental. Can you go back to the person? Well, sure. Yeah. I'm in a relationship. This person beats the shit out of me, and I'm going to go back. And so I came to a place where it was just so hard that I just, kind of threw up my hands and I said, God, universe, whatever, if you help me problem solve out of this, if you help me, I swear to you, I will do everything that I can to reveal this surgery. And as I started to do that, I started to get on Twitter and I started to realize that, hey, kids are medically transitioning. And people think transgender people know that. I had no clue. I knew about the bathroom issue. That was it. Other than that, I just lived my life, right? And I started to see what was happening to kids. And I started obsessively reading about cases about, wow, this study has been revoked. There's not a study here. This is not FDA approved. What's going on? And it was a strong point for me when I started to get that with kids. I mean, I have 3 kids that are the age that they're medically transitioning kids. And once I figured that out and I kind of came together and I started to be able to problem solve and feel better, I kind of shook my head and go, okay, I get it. I'll do this until this will stop. This will stop medically transitioning kids.
And you have 3 kids. Do any of them?
What's that?
Do any of them want to transition?
No.
No. Okay. These are your kids. I think you meant earlier. You said I'm a biological male. You meant to say biological female. You actually do have 3 kids. Yeah. We have to clarify these things. You talk about data though. You do talk about some data that is backed up. I mean, and one of the real issues is the tendency for suicide about 7 to 10 years after transition. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that?
I can. This is another reason why we're medically transitioning kids, because it's a great PR move, which is, wouldn't you rather have an alive daughter than a dead son, kind of thing.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
basically
they
saying you don't
shame you.
transition. Yeah. uh, which is, there are no studies that tell us that anybody kills themselves if they can't medically transition. I gave testimony in South Dakota where a gentleman got up and he was so convincing. He was pounding the table. If you guys stop medically transitioning kids, then I'm going to demand you carry the caskets. And I remember going, oh man, maybe I'm doing the wrong thing. And I investigated, not one in South Dakota for 5 years that ever happened. Um, and I found the only long term study, which was done by a company in Sweden. It followed 324 medically transitioned adults for 30 years, from 1973 and then 30 years later. And here's what they found, which is exactly what's happening. When you first start medical transition, it's like a Christmas present. It's awesome. This is going to fix you, just like I said. Now think of, young kids. This is going to fix their awkwardness. This is going to fix the lesbians not having to deal with homosexuality. It's going to fix the gay people. It's going to fix the autistic people that don't. So we get all the people, all the kids that we're supposed to be protecting, that think that this is going to fix them. So they start on testosterone. They're really excited for the hair, all this. And about 6 or 7 months later, they're like, well, that didn't really help. But I still have my top surgery, so that's gonna fix it. And so then they have their top surgery, and then they go, well, that didn't fix it. And then, well, I got the bottom surgery coming up. And then after that, when you hit 7 to 10 years, you kind of sit back and go, well, that didn't fix a thing. And now the dating pool is slashed by 90%. I have early onset osteoporosis. I'm on blood thinners. I have heart issues. The dating pool gone. I can't have kids. And so it's at this time when these kids are going to start killing themselves. We are going to have a suicide epidemic, and it's already starting. But again, the news is not covering it. Yeah. So the better alive daughter than a dead son is, it doesn't work. And when you say that to a child or to a parent, it halts all conversation. If you have a child, you know that if somebody looks at you that knows what they're doing, saying, if you don't do this, your kid's going to commit suicide. Well, it's pretty much, what do I need to do then?
But you've got to inform parents on what the truth is and what the data really shows. For you, would you do it again if let's a hypothetical guarantee that you wouldn't have these kind of medical complications? Would you do it again?
Probably not. No.
Still no. Even if it was a smooth surgery.
Probably not. No. It's taken me a while to say that, and you get pushed when you're talking about this stuff to detrans, right? And it's another fallacy. I mean, I'm changed. Hormones are permanent. I mean, I could detrans, but then I'd be, like a trans woman. And I really don't want to go through the BS. My family's been through enough. So I finally gotten to a point in my life where I accept who I am. Mm-hmm. Should I have accepted who I was before? Absolutely. Absolutely. It is the new homophobia, honestly. And people think that they're stepping behind it and promoting transgenderism to promote the LGBT. Well, when you promote and push medical transitioning, you are homophobic, because the majority of those kids are going to be gay.
Yeah, you said that in another interview. It seems like a really good point. It's like, it's when you're telling a gay boy or a lesbian girl that they're actually transgender, it's sort of the new age form of conversion therapy.
It's absolutely what it is. But this is a perfect storm. If you've ever been in marketing or done any kind of advertising, whether it was meant to be or not, this is a perfect PR storm, right? And making sure my voice doesn't get heard, like in Spain, it's happening all over the place. And you have to say, hey, wait a second, this is a huge financial industry. These people have tons of money to shut me up, shut everybody up.
Yeah. One of the statistics I find interesting is who identifies as transgender as a baby boomer, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z. And there's just a massive uptick as you get to Gen Z. Obviously still small as with respect to the population, but and Gen Xers and baby boomers, you're looking at 0.2% of the population. Millennials spikes up to 1.2, so tenfold increase. But then Gen Z is at a 1.8. So I find that interesting. And if it was purely genetic or biological, and something internally happening, physiologically speaking, that should be more consistent. And so what I guess my question is, what role does social influence play on when somebody decides to identify as transgender?
It's a good question. Let me talk about gay kids a little bit, because gay kids are, I feel like they're all mine. I was one. I mean, I'm so protective of them. I love them. I just want to circle them and go, oh, you little butch lesbians. I mean, you guys are like gods in the gay community. You're awesome. And, the femboys, I'm like, just wait. You're going to be so popular when you grow up. You're going to have such a good life. But what's going on in society, I mean, I have 3 teenagers, is that the experimental phase in child finding who we are now includes our sexuality. It's, homosexuality is not, completely accepted, and there's still taboos. But with kids, they have the opportunity to sit down and go, am I gay? Am I not? Am I bisexual? Am I not? And kids go, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So we have these kids in the world that are going, okay, I think I'm gay. And then, no, I think I'm straight. And then I'm this, and then I'm that. And then they grow up and figure out who they are, right? So the numbers that we're seeing are some acceptance, but some of it is they have the opportunity to figure out who they are in a more open environment. But a girl saying that she's a lesbian at 14 and then marrying a man at 25 doesn't yield any permanent damage, right? It's kind of like, yeah, I went through a phase I didn't really know, but you know what? I'm really into dudes. And so that time period kind of resolves itself, right? With gender, what we're finding is all the people that don't belong, the Johnny quarterbacks, all that kind of stuff. These are not the people that are claiming to be transgender. It's all the kids that, are probably going to grow up to be gay, autism, the awkward kids. And all of a sudden they have this group, they have this clique for the reason why something's wrong with them. And then they go on Reddit, where people like me are banned for saying, medical transitioning is, there's some complications there. Oh, banned for life. So these kids are all getting, this. Society news won't cover it. And so these kids are grabbing onto this. The medical industry, the mental health industry, I think there's 33 states now that have banned talk therapy for transgender kids. So think of a kid in therapy. I was born the opposite, or I'm supposed to be the opposite sex, and the only thing the therapist can say is, let's call the gender clinic. Yeah. I mean, there's no, why do you feel that way? What's going on? And that needs to be, if somebody thinks that they're gay, whatever, we need to have the opportunity to go, what makes you feel that way? You're 14, you're not having sex with anybody right now. So you know what? You're a kid. Let's worry about being a kid. So there's all this affirmation that 14-year-olds, we have the 14-year-old lesbian, right? That's married to a man. Now let's take that 14-year-old that thought that she was transgender and she hits 25. Well, she can't have kids. She's cut her life down. And these are all statistic facts. You can go on my website. She's cut her life down by 10 or 15%, or 10 or 15 years. All these complications that are coming up, it induces psychosis. So if a girl transitions to a boy, testosterone has a 12% chance of making you crazy as hell. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about the bone deterioration. We don't talk about the fact that when you are on synthetic hormones for a long period of time, like 30 years, why don't you find me all those people that have been all those hormones for 30 years that are over the age of 55, 60? You won't find very many. You know why? They're dead. Or they're in wheelchairs. Why? It eats bones away. Do we know why? We have no clue. We have none. No studies. So there's all these things. So we take that 14-year-old, that lesbian, we take that 14-year-old transgender, has nothing to do with LGBT. This has to do with that 24-year-old kid that calls their mom and dad and says all those things. Look at what my life is, and it shouldn't have been. Why did you let me transition? Now I'm going to kill myself. And I'm telling you, these parents are going to hear gunshots on the phone when these kids fall on the coffee table. The suicide epidemic is coming. This is a huge, huge deal.
So do you have any Democrats on your side on this? At least when I say your side, I mean on this very specific issue of removing parental consent for transitioning a child, or hell, I mean the case we had in Texas where the father didn't want the kid to transition and the mother was affirming that. That was, that really made a lot of headlines. I mean, did
you know that guy got kicked out of the military for organizing a pro LGBT to get rid of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell? Did you know that?
Which guy?
They called him a bigot. They called him a
that father. Wow.
Yeah, he got kicked out of the military.
So he's obviously not like like a right wing evangelist.
No, he's
yeah. So, are you aware of any Democrats who would agree with us on this, or at least are outspoken?
No,
they might quietly agree, but
I talked to a lot of politicians, and I will not go on board with any politicians that it's an evangelical Christian that's pulling this forward, because it's not going to work. It's going to go backwards. They know it's not going to work. They just want their names in the paper. So I've kind of stayed away from that. And we have several bills that, and I helped with the South Dakota, the original bill. And I'll tell you that Fred Deutsch, the guy that wrote that and worked together, awesome dude. He's the only right-wing evangelical Republican that he really has his heart in the right place. Mm-hmm. Other than that, I won't work with anybody because it's not going to work. It's going backwards. No, I do not have any Democrats. But what I do have is I do have an army of transgender people. Yeah. I do have documentaries coming out of the wrong kind of trans. I do have people that are reading my words, and I'm getting trans every day that are saying, hey, I'm 45 years old. I've been transitioned for 20 years. I had no clue what's going on. Put me in front of the camera. Yeah. I've got an army. And so what's going to happen is that the transgender people that have kids that are my age are coming up and going, yeah, we don't agree with you. We don't agree with the trans radicals. We don't. And here's why.
So I want to transition then, and that's great news. I can't wait to see the documentary and the kind of work you're going to produce here. And I think that's probably more important to have actual trans people speaking out as opposed to politicians that maybe just kind of go with the wind. I want to ask you maybe a slightly more difficult policy question, something we all struggle with, and especially as of late, the Supreme Court decision that protected the right of it was I believe a biological man who transitioned to a woman, worked at a funeral home. I might be getting that wrong, but this is basically the story. And the owner of the funeral home wanted to fire the person. Now, this is a difficult situation, right? It kind of depends on where you work. But I think we have to admit that it's a difficult situation because it's one thing to protect immutable characteristics, but when somebody's behavior outwardly changes, an appearance outwardly changes in a sensitive place, like a funeral home, how do we protect the rights of, the right of people to associate with whom they want to associate with, while also protecting transgender people who want to transition? How do you, maybe there is no perfect answer. It's a thing we're struggling with, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, here's my thoughts on that. You choose to transition. You make a choice to medically transition. So you need to deal with the consequences of that. Now, with that, we need to, transgender people do need to have protection. But when you infringe on other people's rights, and, lesbian feminists and feminists in general have been arguing and screaming, rightly so, about this, and nobody's been listening to them. But when you infringe on other people's rights because of a choice that you have, there's something wrong there.
Yeah.
So there needs to be a balance, right? You can't abuse people. But then again, you can't be a dude that's got a 6-inch beard, that has red lipstick on, haven't taken an ounce of estrogen, and demand that people use female pronouns and call you Sally and put you in the barracks with other women. That's
Right.
wrong. I don't care how you feel. I don't, it, you know, we are conditioned as human beings from a safety standpoint to use the pronouns. You walk in the room with your, eye patch and stuff, and I'm alone. I'm going to react differently than if a woman comes in.
Right.
It's a protection thing, right? So asking people to call people opposite pronouns or rearrange their lives and the structure of what we've been our whole lives because it makes you feel uncomfortable called what you are. Well, too bad. When you start looking like a man or talking like a man or a woman or whatever, the pronouns will come. So we have a whole bunch of, shall we say, spoiled, entitled, mentally ill, not right, transgender radicals that are running policy, and they need to, somebody needs to, like we do to little kids, just go, let me have the mic. You're making an ass out of yourself, and take it away.
Yeah, and it's important to recognize, like, as you're saying, you represent probably a majority of trans people.
I do.
There's a
Absolutely.
there's a fringe that's just that does that does want to have a live and let live solution. Tolerance is different than forced acceptance.
Exactly.
Listen, if you ask me to call you by whatever name that you want to be called by and whatever pronoun you want to be called by, I'm just going to do it out of politeness. But if I refuse to, you can't have me arrested. And I think, and shame me or cancel me. And I think that's a pretty fair compromise when it comes to living and let live. And this gets into the discussion about the military. And it seems like we'll probably agree on this. It seems to me that Trump had a pretty good policy in place. And so the policy basically looked like this. If I'm the platoon commander, and one of my guys comes up to me and says, you know what, I am no longer Joe, I am Jane today. The policy was basically, okay, fine. Now, Jane, get back to work. Get back to work, and nothing can change. Your behavior can't change. Just like the military says, well, you can't get a tattoo on your face. You can't grow your hair long because that's already in rules in the military. You can't go pierce your ears. Those rules still apply. And also, you still have to deploy in 3 months. So, no, you can't get any surgery, and no taxpayer money will not pay for it. That was the policy. So, frankly, it seems like a pretty good balance. That has been totally changed now. We have certain Navy SEALs even transitioning at this moment. Going on CNN and talking about it. Active duty. So you just told me all of the medical complications. You told me that there's really no science. There's no structure or standards to these transitions. No. And your taxpayer dollars are paying for at least one Navy SEAL to transition to a woman, and
we're paying surgeons that are with medical malpractice out the yin yang, hurting people. We're paying them billing insurance companies and stuff $250,000 for one surgery and complications.
And by the way, you can't even join the military if you have like flat feet. So, given the, we're pretty strict, and for good reason. Like, I can't deploy if I haven't gone to see the dentist and gotten signed off, right, or gotten a few vaccines. So it strikes me as, it seems pretty obvious to me that, given the medical complications that you've experienced and told me are quite normal, there's no way we can deploy anybody who's undergone this transition.
No. Here's what Trump did. Trump actually has some balls. Unfortunately, Biden doesn't, and it's pretty obvious. Trump looked at the facts. He looked at the studies. At what point does a man taking estrogen, if he gets all, the parts taken out that are producing testosterone, how long does it take for that person to take estrogen, for them to be equal physically, emotionally to a woman? And they said, we don't know. So he said, okay, we're not going to do that. And that's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And we have to call a spade a spade. I'm sorry, we have to call a spade a spade. If a man has a 6-inch beard, he's wearing lipstick, he wants to go by Sue, and he's wearing nylons, skipping through the daisies in the Navy SEAL program. He needs to be taken out. I don't care what the, I don't care. Take him out. I don't care. There needs to be studies that say this is when, a man that transition is equal to a woman physically. And we don't know that yet. And it's funny. I actually have a thing on Twitter. I have a little eye patch over my eye. I said, yeah, me and Dan, we're going to figure out this whole trans in sports. We're going to do an MMA fight. And I even wore the eye patch so I don't embarrass him.
Well, that's another big deal. It's like, letting biological men compete with women in MMA. I mean, we've seen women
ridiculous.
It's absolutely insane.
It's ridiculous.
We're destroying women. The Equality Act, I was just asking about it. Luckily, it does not take away parental consent for these transitions yet. It's still a problem when some parents want to affirm that. But it did destroy women's sports. I mean, that was just passed out of the House. I hope it doesn't get to the Senate.
Me too. And that's actually, if you think about it backwards, I mean, that's taking female rights away. And, before I transitioned, I was never into feminism. I really didn't listen to their literature and stuff. But my God, they make a point that is like over the moon, back around again with so much sense. And you have the trans radicals, or, they make all this, argument, and then trans radicals go, "You're just a turf. You suck." That's their response. And these feminists are going, wait a second, did you not read everything I just wrote? And then you have society going, oh, we don't want to be bigots. We don't want to be bigots. So you've got feminists, you've got evangelicals, you have all these people that are saying the right things and nobody's listening to them. But the conversations between transgender people, I'm telling you, they agree with me and they're coming out and figuring out what's going on. This is not going to last. Medical transitioning kids, trans women in sports, it's not a long-lasting plan. It's not. It's going to backfire.
I like the optimism.
It's going to backfire big time. It's going to, doctors are going to be in jails, losing everything. Pharmaceutical executives are going to be fired. Politicians are going to be unearthed. This is going to be, and I've said this before, the worst medical scandal in history of the world. This is going to be huge, how many people it takes down.
I think you're right. I hope you're right. And I guess the last question, I might miss this vote, so I've got to run.
Okay.
Last question, but obviously fully against children transitioning, but should there still be a space, or do you just think there needs to be more studies for adults who want to transition?
There needs to be reality. There's a thing called WPATH. It's supposed to be a baseline for care. It doesn't hold up in court. I had 8 attorneys tell me that. It's kind of at the doctor's discretion, do this, do that. So there's nothing to hold anything accountable for. We need to have that held accountable, first of all, for adults that want to do that. We need to tell people about the risks. We need to hold medical professionals, to standards, and we need to call it what it is. Medical transition is cosmetic surgery. Unfortunately, cosmetic surgery is not covered by insurance companies. It's not covered by governments. So we have been bamboozled as a country. So think of this as one big expensive boob job. Boob jobs don't save lives. You don't see women that are getting boob jobs running down the street without shirts on going, look at these are real. I was born with these. That's mental illness. Let's call it what it is. This needs to be taken out as a financial aspect. If you want to transition, fine, pay for it. If you want to transition and be a Navy SEAL and wear lipstick and have all this stuff, no. I mean, there needs to be some sanity. And unfortunately, we have politicians like Biden who are total idiots that refuse to make hard decisions. Trump made hard decisions, and he was right 150,000,000% on trans people in the military.
And there's a problem with politicians who do tend to succumb to the loudest voices, and the truth has to come out, the science has to come out. Scott, thank you so much for being on, and that was a really fascinating discussion. I think people loved it. Really appreciate it. What's your website?
Oh, yes, thank you. Before we go, it's TReVoices, TReVoices.com. I have a template up there for everybody to write senators about the Levine, Dr. Levine. It's already written. I've got all the emails. All you have to do is copy and paste. It takes 5 minutes. You can email 100 senators and just light these people up.
Roger that. Scott, thanks so much for being on. Appreciate you.
All right, you take care.
All right, bye.